See, if I were to go to a publisher's website or Instagram, or even go to a bookstore, namely Waterstones, a high retail bookstore, and I was just scrolling, scrolling past their books, honestly, I would see so many covers, and yet somehow they would all look the same. Wild, right? But really, they're not. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelly, and here we read with feeling, we rant with facts, and we call things what they are, even if it makes the publishing industry slightly uncomfortable. And considering how many times I call out the publishing industry, yeah, I'm sure they're quite uncomfortable with a lot of my videos. Yeah, and today we're not stopping. Today we're digging into something I think a lot of readers feel but don't always have language for, and that is the role of publishers in gatekeeping diversity. Because yes, we're seeing more diverse books than ever, but why do so many of them get under marketed? And not just that, a lot of them disappear after a trend dies. And sometimes you see these books by diverse authors, and it really just seems like a lot of them, it kind of just feels like they're boxed into specific trauma or cultural narratives. So today we're going to unpack how publishing works behind the scenes, who gets the green light, and what happens when diversity becomes a checkbox instead of a commitment. And I know that this is going to be interesting simply because I don't work directly in publishing, I've learned a lot from people I'm around, from, people who do work in publishing, telling us about their life, their job, the ins and outs of publishing, and from research, but I don't have direct experience. So obviously take this with a grain of salt and do your own research and make your own opinions as always. But let's actually talk about it. Let's have the conversation. First and foremost, we have to define gatekeeping because it's not always about loud rejections. Gatekeeping in publishing is often quiet and systemic, okay? It shows up when agents won't take on another Black author this year, or editors say the voice is too specific or hard to market, or diverse manuscripts get passed over for not centering trauma, or a book gets acquired but is given no real marketing budget or support. And I know that we've been seeing quite a lot of conversations around this specifically because we have seen so many authors come out and talk about how they have to be on TikTok marketing their own book because they were barely given a marketing budget, if they were given one at all. I remember even seeing a video on Book Talk, the book side of TikTok, where a book talker was advocating for a friend of hers who had a publishing deal by a a traditional publisher, and this is a big traditional publisher, but where was the marketing? Where was the marketing? Especially because the book sounded great as well. But yeah, see, gatekeeping is the slow erasure that happens at every stage, so acquisition, positioning, promotion, shelf life, and even when diverse books do get published, they're often expected to represent everything. You have one Muslim fantasy, it becomes the Muslim fantasy, and the author's every word is dissected under a microscope. Meanwhile, how many versions of Sad White Boy Gets Sad in Brooklyn do we get every year? Unbothered, untouched, unlimited. Let's be honest about it. And let's talk about also, diversity being a trend, because that's where a lot of the gatekeeping hides. We saw it during 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw it with the AAPI hate crimes. We saw it with, Indigenous heritage moments. Suddenly, publishers scramble to post solidarity graphics and boost diverse books for a month. Maybe. But what happens after the news cycle? Many of those same authors report that there was a drop in marketing, there was ghosted communication, there was little to no long-term support, and even smaller advances on follow-up projects. And I say this all the time, diversity isn't seasonal. It is not for a season. But in publishing, it's often treated that way. especially when the people making decisions don't reflect the communities being celebrated. And that brings me to the next point, and that is who is making the decisions. So here's the publishing pipeline in a nutshell from what I know. Remember, like I said, I'm not directly in publishing, so this is all with a grain of salt from research and what I know. You have agents pick what gets pitched essentially to the publishers. Editors decide what gets bought. Marketing and sales decide what gets pushed. Booksellers decide what gets stocked. And readers decide what gets read. And obviously, when it comes to that last line, it's changed in the last few years because readers who decide what gets read are usually the big influencers who fall within the marketing and the reader segment of things, which is very, very interesting how things have kind of changed in that way. Now, we really do have to ask here who's in those rooms, because as of the last major surveys, publishing remains overwhelmingly white, female, upper middle class, and for some reason New York based. I know New York is like the center of things, but Jesus, go somewhere. See, when the same kinds of people control every gate, even the diverse books that make it through are filtered through the lens of what those people believe is sellable. That's why we often see diverse characters written for white consumption. And for those of you who are not getting what I mean stories that explain themselves instead of just existing, covers that scream diverse but still palatable. If you've ever seen a book described as like the Hunger Games, but brown, congratulations, you've witnessed market sanitization in real time. I don't think I've ever seen something like that, but I genuinely won't be surprised if there's one out there, because I've seen similar, quite a lot of similar. Ooh, like this, but with a brown lead, like this, but with a black lead. And I don't blame the authors when this is how these books are being sold, because they know that this is how the book needs to be sold to reach an audience, and that's not their fault. Okay, that's how the market has been set up, and they need to literally sell. So they need to go with how the market sells. Now, let's talk about what this means for authors. Diverse authors often carry the burden of representation politics, which is basically like, oh, you're the first blank author on our list. Okay, and I know quite a lot of authors have definitely gone through that. Beyond that, there's also sensitivity education, having to constantly explain context to white editors or readers. And we don't see white authors having to do that. We don't see that at all. And beyond that, there's also like online pressure. One misstep and these authors are problematic, while white authors get redemption arcs over and over and over, because white authors stay failing, like they stay doing the most, but they get chances. Let someone from a marginalized background mess up and oops, out the door, you're complete, you're done, so sorry. And you guys know I'm all about accountability, but let's be honest, the way that we're doing accountability for certain people, no, because it's not accountability. Beyond that, there's also financial inequity. With marginalized authors, there are smaller advances, there are fewer opportunities, and there's inconsistent support, and we've heard it time and time again, and we've been hearing more of it, which I'm really, really happy about, because I'm happy that they're speaking out and we're learning more, because the more they speak out, the more we can actually start to make a change, because you call them out, call the publishers out, and they're going to have to listen. But yeah, many authors of color, they get published once, then they quietly disappear from publisher catalogs because their books weren't marketed or protected, and then they don't sell, and so they're just like, oh, we didn't have that many sales numbers, so it's not looking like you're going to sell, so we're not going to pick up your next book. But then it didn't sell because you didn't market it. And the thing is, when they do speak out, they're branded difficult, ungrateful, or unmarketable. I'm just like, no, they're not. They're being honest about the inequalities that they face. And this isn't just exhausting, like it's career ending. Imagine being an author in that position. I can't imagine. Like, it's even scary to think, like, because you're going to have to be walking on eggshells, walking on hot coals even, to do something that you love, whereas other people in your position, They can honestly walk easily, even run, and that's how they end up so far ahead of you. See, publishing diversity without publishing infrastructure is genuinely just PR. It's just like they're just telling us, "Oh yeah, we're publishing diverse books." And you don't set up the infrastructure to support that, to ensure that it is, as successful as your white authored books. You are setting them up for failure. So all I'm hearing is a PR answer on how you support everyone. So really, again, just performative. And we don't like that, do we? No, we don't. So how do we break this cycle? Okay. Honestly, publishers, they need to hire and promote more diverse editors, marketers, and publicists. Beyond that, they need to invest in long-term author development, not just one-off moments, especially when there's like a spark in social media and they have to do something to show that they're being supportive. No, let's look to the long term. you know and let diverse stories exist outside of trauma. I spoke about this before. Like, diverse stories are stories like any other. They just have a diverse cast, or written by a diverse author, or both. They exist outside of trauma. They're stories like any other story, you know? And this is really, really important. Publishers need to pay competitive advances across the board. They do, because you definitely see the pay disparity. I know, like, not a lot of people disclose, their advances and their deals, but when they do, you do see a bit of disparity there. And we also need to stop reducing identities to market trends. And I think as readers, because I know I come from publishers a lot, but as readers, we have a part to play as well, because we can pre-order and request diverse books at libraries, at stores. We can do that, because pre-orders really, really help authors, especially debut authors as well. So make sure you're supporting these debut authors, these mid-list authors, because they definitely need you to ensure that they're being seen, and that they're being seen as people who are marketable, who will be successful, because that's really, really important. And we have to be sure that we're uplifting nuanced, non-palatable stories, and you guys know what I said before, stories that challenge us, because it'll be so great for our worldview and what we're used to be challenged. So we have to start uplifting the stories that do that for us. And you know what's really important, especially in this day and age? Keep the receipts. Remember which publishers only show up for Black History Month, or AAPI Month, or Latina Heritage Month, all the other months that we have, obviously across the board. Keep your receipts 100%. In this day and age, you need it, because I'm not letting up, and neither should you. Remember, guys, diversity isn't just about what's on the shelf. It's about who gets to write, who gets to edit, who gets to promote, and who gets to thrive behind the scenes. Because until the industry changes, the gate is going to stay locked, and the rest of us still waiting at the door. Because this entire shelf here, this one directly behind me, is my shelf of diverse authors. And I'm not kidding. Every single book on the shelf is written by a BIPOC author. Every single book. And there are at least, I think, maybe 200 books on this shelf. And these books are some of my absolute favorite books. And they're some of the best books I've ever read. Some of the most beautiful books that I think have been written in recent times, because a lot of them are recent releases, to be fair. Genuinely so, so beautiful. Diversity in publishing should feel like breathing, not begging. It should feel natural. And that starts with holding the gatekeepers accountable. And we have to keep doing that until there's real action. But yeah, guys, let me know your thoughts, especially when it comes to publishers and marketing, and how they use that to gatekeep, even if they're so adamant that no, 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 we're doing more, but your actions are not showing it. Like, let me know your thoughts. If you work in publishing as well, let me know your thoughts. I always love hearing from people who are in the industry, because they always give me more insight, and it always adds to the knowledge that I have. And I know that the commenters appreciate it as well. So let me know your thoughts, and let's just continue the conversation. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.